about it. They have a healthy obsession with kaiju. Tom!
Welcome to Daikaiju Network, where we have a healthy obsession with kaiju. I'm your co-host, Kent, and with me is your other co-host,
Jason. How's it going, everyone?
So for the first time in probably a couple months, we're actually having a discussion here. And like I was asking Jason right before we came on, I think the last discussion we had to deal with a set of SPECTREMAN episodes before we started doing the commentary and brief discussion bit here, most recently until after yesterday, where we concluded that wonderful series. You can catch that already on YouTube and a few other video platforms.
And as well as Spotify.
It will soon be coming to a podcast provider near you.
Well, it should already be available.
On iTunes already?
Yep.
Huh.
And Spotify.
Okay. And so I just also have a brief announcement here. Jason and I, after this Sunday when we discuss Godzilla -1, we will be taking our usual break from podcasting. And for those who don't know why, it is because we're going to spend most of December getting things put together for our annual year-end podcast. We have yet to figure out a date on that, but that we usually like taking quite a bit of time to figure out topics. It's usually a smorgasbord of various kaiju topics. A lot of times.
Pretty much one of our longest episodes of the year.
And last year was a 4-hour, 36-minute podcast, our longest ever, and I'm very proud of that.
It pretty much eclipsed one from several years ago, which was I think it was a overview of one of the G-Fests, and that was 4 hours and 11 minutes. So it eclipsed it by 15 minutes.
I didn't realize we did a G-Fest overview that was like 4 hours.
It was either that or something else. I completely forgot because I know I was migrating some of the episodes over to Podbean, that I saw a huge smorgasbord list of so many things, and it topped out to be a little over 4 hours.
And so we're usually what we do is we do things like year in review and kind of revisit certain things. We'll probably revisit -1, even though we will have covered that a few weeks earlier. We didn't go to G-Fest this year, so we're not going to be really talking about that. And then it's kind of just a fun little episode. It's a kind of a look back on the year that was, talking about things that have happened up to that point in the 3 weeks or so that we hadn't been podcasting, and then sort of a look ahead into the next year. So it's just kind of a fun way to, try to end the year and to look forward as we enter a new year. And so for this particular episode, if you can't tell by the shirts that we're wearing, we are covering the beast from 20,000 Fathoms. What?
Before we do actually move on, as far as the calendar, and I know after when we get done reviewing -1 that we're going to transition back to our original Saturday broadcasting date. And when I was looking at the calendar for next month, would December 30th work out for you?
You gonna wine and dine me first?
Yeah.
I think at the moment that looks okay.
Yeah, because
that's still far enough ahead to where if something comes up, I'll let you know. We'll have to come up with an actual time, though. You better start early.
Yeah, that or maybe
9 in the morning my time. Will that work for you?
No.
Just in case we have another long one, we need to make sure we have enough time during the day to do that.
Maybe schedule it an hour before we usually do it.
We'll see. I'll convince you.
Okay, go ahead.
But like I was saying, we're covering the beast from 20,000 Fathoms in this particular episode. I think this is the first time ever Jason and I have ever worn matching T-shirts for a podcast episode. So we are covering that, and then that's it. So before we start discussing the movie, Jason, go ahead and do the usual housekeeping.
Yeah, if you see a subscribe button down below or above, wherever you're watching us from, make sure to hit that subscribe button, as well as smash or stomp the like button. And if you have any comments regarding to the movie that we're going to be discussing here in a minute, make sure to have your comments down below. And you can follow Daikaiju Network everywhere or one place at our Linktree URL right on your screen there, /Daikaiju Network. And we're available on the following video platforms such as YouTube, Rumble, Twitch, Facebook, and X/Twitter. And also available on the following audio platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, as well as Podbean. And you can find both video and audio versions of our episodes right on our website at daikaijunetwork.com.
All right, so let's go ahead and start discussing The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. The movie was released in 1953, and it was directed by Eugene Lowry, who, interestingly enough, would go on to direct a number of other films that I never realized that he was a part of. So, for example, he would end up directing The Giant Behemoth, which in some respects is sort of a bit of a carbon copy of this movie that we're going to discuss. And then he would also go on to direct Gorgo. So this was, I believe, his very first foray into giant monsters. And I think it's kind of telling that, you know, he would go on to direct The Giant Behemoth. But if King Kong was sort of the maybe foundation for Godzilla, The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, I would argue, is more the substantive part for Gojira. Because when you watch this movie, if you have already seen Gojira and then you come in and watch this movie and you pay just close enough attention to what happens in this movie, I think you will clearly see that there are moments and aspects of the creature itself and attributes and elements of the creature that would be inspired for Gojira the following year, I should say, in 1954.
Yeah, it basically preceded Gojira by 16 months. And I was reading up on a few other things that originally I'm trying to see the name, but for this particular dinosaur that they call it here, Rhedosaurus, that it was also supposed to have, you know, breathe out atomic flames like Godzilla does, and also Ray Harryhausen in one of the interviews was talking about some like very similarities between the Rhedosaurus and Godzilla, but then it also sort of surprised me how he had some disgust towards the Godzilla series. Which
I'm surprised you are acting surprised. Yeah, I mean I
didn't even realize about that.
I mean, this has been talked about throughout the kaiju community for a long time, and he was very open about it. Yeah, he despises the Japanese, or I should say despise, because he's been gone for a while. He despised the Japanese form of monster movies because he hated suitimation. He thought it was cheap and silly. And he, you know, of course, he's going to embrace the stop motion aspect. And, you know, as anyone who maybe has delved into the history of Gojira knows, that they initially were looking at stop motion for Godzilla, but
obviously
because of Toho and because of how Japanese, you know, movie making goes, they wanted it fast and they wanted it cheap. And you can't do that with stop motion. So,
yeah. At least they've experimented stop motion at least a couple or so times in the Godzilla franchise. Well, early on with King Kong versus Godzilla.
For that brief, like, half-second clip between the two.
Yeah. But, yeah, otherwise it's just pretty expensive and time-consuming.
However, and I don't know if you own the Godzilla vs. Biollante Blu-ray. I'm not sure if it's on the DVD.
I remember. Yeah, I believe I did, because was it Kraken releasing? Did they bring re-release?
No.
Oh, okay.
It was someone else. I can't really see
I think I might have gotten that, at least. I'm not entirely sure who released it. After when we get done, I'll have to make sure to go up and double check on that.
Actually, now that I think about it, it could be on the DVD. But nevertheless, my point is this. When they were in pre-production for Godzilla vs. Biollante, they did test out some stop motion for Biollante. And there's test footage on that disc and where you can see how they were experimenting with it and kind of what it would have looked like. So it's not like Toho was opposed to it. It's just that they and kind of the industry as a whole is like fast and cheap. And so Sudomation was the way to go. But getting back to the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, this is a movie that tends to be relatively popular amongst giant monster movie fans, at least here in the States. And I think rightfully so. Here in just a moment, we'll kind of dive into our thoughts on it. But I think one of the most important things needs to be discussed first, and that is, interestingly enough, this is the first giant monster movie sort of to involve atomic bomb / radiation within its storyline. Right, handful of years after the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan, and then of course by this point in 1953 the Cold War was in full effect, and there was nuclear testing, by both the Soviet Union and the United States. So this movie really jump-started the whole nuclear weapon, nuclear radiation plots that would drive a lot of monster movies, at least in the United States, through the 60s. And so this was sort of the OG of that particular type of monster movie. And I think that's pretty interesting and pretty unique.
Yeah, and the one thing, too, while watching this movie last night, with the plot at the beginning of this film where it was taking place in the Arctic and then them detonating the atomic bomb there and then witnessing the Rhedosaurus and all that. From what I was reading, it certainly omitted a specific thing that in my opinion, when it came to Gamera, it had that very similar sort of plot at the beginning of that film, the 1965 one, where they were also in the Arctic, and then there was an atomic bomb involved there, and then Gamera awakens and from the Arctic ice and everything. So to me, I would say that they would have also gotten inspiration from this specific movie too, which unfortunately I didn't see anything remotely related to Gamera when it came to this movie when reading off of it. I'm sure maybe somewhere in the biography or behind the scenes of Gamera where they might have also gotten inspiration and everything from this specific movie as far as kind of that beginning sequence.
Yeah, that's a good point. I never thought about that, but yeah, now that you bring it up, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if Gamera did borrow from this. What I can say is this, is that I've seen a few documentaries about the creation of Gamera, and Noriaki Yuasa, who was involved in all the Showa Gamera movies except for Gamera versus Barugon, nothing was said about this movie. And I'm willing to bet that just because nothing was said about this movie perhaps inspiring Gamera in any way, shape, or form, doesn't mean that they didn't look at this and borrow some ideas from it. Here's the thing. I mean, we know Gamera is directly, let's just say it, a ripoff of Godzilla, but then Godzilla got inspiration from Beast. So there's that through line still too. So technically speaking, but the plot of this movie, pretty straightforward. To put it in a nutshell, and there really isn't a whole lot of substance to this movie at all. Atomic testing in the Arctic unleashes this prehistoric dinosaur called the Rhedosaurus. Along the way, Tom Nesbitt, our main character, is insistent that he saw a prehistoric creature. One gal, the love interest, quote unquote, if you want to call it that, Lee Hunter sort of believes him. Tom spends most of the movie trying to convince Dr. Elson and Colonel Jack Evans that something is indeed out there. Meanwhile, the Rhedosaurus attacks a couple places on its way to New York. Finally, they realize on an expedition in kind of the Hudson Valley that the Rhedosaurus does exist, that it makes landfall in New York, causes destruction. They realize its blood is toxic, that it's got radiation involved. It's making anyone sick that comes within reasonable distance of its blood or itself. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Like a monster from Japan. And so then Tom Nesbitt, our main character, says a particular radioactive isotope is needed to kill kind of not just the creature itself, but the radiation inside of it, so that way it doesn't spread out and contaminate the city and maybe more. So they shoot it, and that's it. It's basically a giant monster on the loose film. So let's just kind of get into it a little bit more. So, I mean, I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say about it, but Jason, your thoughts on the story?
The story, yeah.
Like the plot, whatever.
Story / plot. It's fairly straightforward, where you get atomic testing and the North Pole there, or the Arctic Circle to be more specific. And then, do a little bit of science. You get a monster that's unleashed from the aftermath of the nuclear testing there, and then sort of wreaks havoc along the way to New York, and you get dialogue between the human elements of like the story behind this Rhedosaurus and how to defeat it. That's essentially is pretty much a straightforward monster movie here, so not much different in that regard, and it's relatively shorter than what I expected in a way. There's not a whole lot of in-depth stuff. It's just kind of sort of pretty much gets going right away, and then just once the monster dies, it's done. There's really not much else to do.
Yeah, the story, I mean, it's surface level stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, sometimes having just a simple, fun story is all that is needed to entertain people. I mean, this movie, I don't think necessarily is trying to send a message at all, but I do have like a couple issues with it, and one sort of ties in a little bit with characters as well. But first off, I think the entire second act of this movie is really a slog. Mm-hmm. The movie seems to come to a very brief not a brief, but an immediate slowdown at the beginning of Act 2, and it involves Tom not only trying to convince several people that the Rhedosaurus exists, he's spending a bunch of time trying to hunt down survivors of other attacks so that they would come forward and be kind of his rebuttal, to everyone else who doubts him that he saw the Rhedosaurus. And the thing is that this segment takes way too long. Like, it's a lot longer than it needs to be. And on top of that, it plays a little bit like a mystery. And the problem with that is that we, the audience, know Tom is right, that he did see something because we saw it ourselves. And on top of that, what we're doing is sitting back, waiting for some of these other characters, like Dr. Elson and Colonel Evans to play catch up. That even though we, the audience, know, we're just kind of sitting there like, okay, they got to be convinced before anything major happens. Like,
Yeah,
that's not totally how it plays out, but in a way it does.
Yeah, there were certain times while watching the movie where I sort of found myself just kind of looking at my phone and all that. So it kind of takes you out a little bit.
It is slow. And like I said, the way they play it out, I think, is wrong. Not to mention it's a lot longer than it needs to be. And then the other problem I have with it, and this sort of goes in with Act 2, but also ties in a little bit with characters, is that they try to they try to develop this romantic relationship between Tom and Lee, and it's the very corny, hokey, 1950s build-up that you would expect out of a movie like this. But not only that, one of the more interesting things I thought about them trying to build a romance here is that not only did they not go quite as far with like hokey dialogue and Tom and Lee like trying to date each other, it's almost as if the writers and maybe even the director himself quickly abandoned this whole notion of trying to build up a love interest between them, because like I said, it sort of plays out a little bit in Lee's apartment when she's given him all these dinosaur photos to go through. And he has like a usual line or two that he gives her, but then it's kind of like done. He goes back to looking through photos, and then he finds the photo of the Rhedosaurus, like, that's the one I saw, and that sort of thing. And then the rest of the movie as well, not just in the rest of the second act, but even on into the third act, there's not much of a build-up between the two. It's just, I think they sort of thought, okay, well, we gave you just enough to where you get the idea that there's a love interest. And I guess that's fine, because I'm tired of like the sappy crap, even though I love these movies, but I'm tired of all of it because you see it almost all the time. And it's the same beats, but at the same time, it's not very well done.
Yeah, I would say that I'm assuming maybe behind the scenes that they had more of a script that was a bit more beefy, but due to the sort of the production budget that they had, it was back in that time, they relatively only had $200,000 for a production budget. So I'm assuming that they probably had a much more beefier script, but due to the budget and then maybe the time constraints and also the amount of time to maybe potentially shoot some of those scenes, if there were potentially more, maybe more going more into depth of the whole love story aspect of the script, they possibly had to cut out a few things, and maybe that was one of the things that kind of suffered the most.
Yeah, and I think the writing is most to blame here, because there just isn't a whole lot to begin with. But I'm going to kind of roll into characters now, because I think this is sort of important, not just in talking about, this, what I would say almost abandoned love interest story with character work. And that is, I don't think Paul Christian and Paula Raymond really are that good or charismatic of actors. For example, Kenneth Tobey, who plays Colonel Jack Evans in this film, and also Cecil Kellaway, who plays Dr. Elson. Those are two actors I have seen in other places. Kenneth Tobey, I've seen him things like the 1951 Thing from Another World. He's also in It Came from Beneath the Sea. He's in a number of other sci-fi monster films kind of that period. And these two actors, Tobey and Kellaway, are very good charismatic actors. These are actors that sort of put their own twist and spin on their characters. Because, for example, with Cecil Kellaway as Dr. Elson, when you watch him in other things that he's in, he has certain mannerisms that he tends to repeat with a lot of his characters, and I almost think he adds or maybe even changes a little bit of some of the dialogue he gives, because there is this Kellaway-ism or Kellaway spin that I will call it, that he has with a lot of the characters he plays. Kenneth Tobey is somewhat of the stereotypical 50s action hero, but in a way it's slightly downplayed just a little bit. But he has a lot of charisma as well. If you've seen him in any of these other films that I've mentioned, or even ones that I didn't, you will realize too that he's got a gravitas to him as well that really just, I think, makes his characters a little bit more likable and interesting. He's not some machismo guy. His characters are always, I think, very realistic and down to earth enough. And these are two actors that are good. They're able to carry not just their own characters, but a film, especially if they are kind of near the front of being like the main stars. Here they aren't. And I think as a result, especially when you get Paul Christian and Paula Raymond involved, when you're looking at the attempted relationship between them, and then the movie as a whole, it's a bit lackluster. These are actors that they're not good enough to really carry the film. They are not seasoned or maybe just talented enough to carry the film well enough, especially during the moments the Rhedosaurus is not on screen.
And just by looking at some of the brief history on the two leading roles in here, the male and female, that with Paul Christensen, he's mainly known as playing the role as Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, and just kind of looking at that, it's
never seen it.
And he appeared in many television shows and all that, which kind of leads to believe that he hasn't particularly delved a whole lot in the whole long feature length movies and all that. He was kind of mainly built to be more into television, and same goes with Paula, where she kind of spent most of her time in the whole television show industry instead of feature length films. So I would say they didn't particularly have too much depth into kind of portraying longer roles compared to TV shows, which are mainly a half hour and everything. So yeah, you can, like what you said, that they weren't quite as seasoned compared to some of these other people that are in this film with them.
And I think it's important that we put more earlier Hollywood into context here, because anyone who is not familiar with kind of older Hollywood needs to understand this, because in today's day and age, especially with streaming services and now studios willing to put more money behind TV shows, you could be a TV actor and actually be an exceptional actor and also make a hell of a lot more movie than if you're involved in film. And not only that, a lot of these actors do end up once in a while at least going into film and starring in various roles. So in today's day and age, the kind of the blending of TV and film is virtually complete. Like, studios are willing to put a lot of money behind not just film, but also TV shows. That was not the case for many years. And that's been a relatively new thing, because back in Hollywood for many decades, if you were a TV actor, you a lot of times did not venture into film because, yeah, you were not considered good enough to be in feature films. If you were a movie actor, then, yeah, you more or less played in films. Once in a while, some of these actors maybe got a cameo in a TV show, but very rarely did they ever star. Some did, but a lot didn't. Like Steve McQueen, for example, did end up starring in a series called Wanted Dead or Alive, a Western series. James Arness, who played the Thing in 1951, I don't know if he was leading man stuff, but he ended up playing in Gunsmoke, handful of years after that film. So I'm not sure, because I haven't looked at their oeuvre, but I almost tend to think that maybe with Christian and Raymond, they became their bread was buttered more in TV, probably post Beast from 20,000 Fathoms than before. And so that explains an awful lot, that these two actors, and I'm not trying to diss them. It just is reality. It is what it is, because I see it there on the screen. They just weren't able to sort of play around more in terms of delivery and mannerisms and other idiosyncrasies with their characters, as opposed to the likes of a Kenneth Tobey and a Cecil Kellaway. And as a result, not just because of choices made in the writing of the story for Act 2, just the fact too that Paul Christian and Paula Raymond just aren't strong enough actors to really, at least for me, keep my attention during that middle act, which is definitely problematic, I think, for this film.
Yeah, so I've got really not much else.
Nothing else? Well, then start us off with effects work. I think this is definitely the highlight of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious with whenever you get Ray Harryhausen, you definitely know what you're going to get. Mainly stop motion action when it comes to beasts, either they're from the past or mythological skeletons, any sort of thing. Here we get Rhedosaurus here, which of course he sort of reused in other films after this particular film. And I would say out of all the Harryhausen ones, it seemed like there isn't a whole lot of stop motion when it comes to this, because you don't get to see Rhedosaurus a whole lot, and there's maybe some minimal amount of special effects in here, not only just the stop motion, but then you also get, when Rhedosaurus is in New York City, you'll get some of the cars that he destroys that are part of the stop motion, even the building that he goes through at one point in New York City, which all of that is stop motion and everything, and it's fairly spectacular. I mean, when it comes to Harryhausen, you're going to get nothing but spectacular stop motion here, and of course he improves more after that, and just with the 50 standards, it's pretty, really, really good at this point. But yeah, there's other than the stop motion effects in that regard. You only get maybe some minimal stuff with some of the scenes with the lighthouse, with the human characters, and then part of the New York City where some of the rubble comes down, some of the people, and all that, and a little bit of destruction. There's not a whole lot of destruction when it comes to more human elements in that regard. Most of it is just in the stop motion part, but there's some actual practical stuff in there that kind of make things a little bit more believable. But other than that, there's not particularly a whole lot, but at least it definitely makes up when it comes to more of the stop motion stuff, and then a little bit for the practical effects to kind of tie in the stop motion effects.
Yeah, Harryhausen's work here is absolutely exceptional. I mean, I don't think I can really say more about it because I mean, it is just absolutely fantastic. I think even by 2023 standards, even though stop motion is very much only a small niche thing that like amateur filmmakers may use for their own small projects, stop motion more or less is dead in Hollywood anymore. But I still think what Harryhausen does here, at least with this movie in particular, is very, very good. It's exceptional. And I still think it holds up for a film that is 70 years old as of this year. Hey, it just so happens a big anniversary happened to cover it.
I just now realized that too.
So yeah, it's exceptional work, but you hit on something that I wanted to get to and might as well because we both are bringing it up here. It's been, first of all, it's been a while since I've seen this film. I think it's been anywhere from 6 to 8 years roughly since I last saw this film. And I had forgotten really how little Rhedosaurus action there is. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a terrible thing per se, because if a movie is done well enough, you still feel the presence of the monster. For example, in the 2014 Godzilla movie, even though Godzilla is not on the screen every second, Godzilla is always kind of the heart of that movie because the characters are always talking about him. They're trying to figure out the mystery of him and the Mutos and all that. Godzilla is still central to that story, even though he may not be in every single frame of that film. Here with Beast, it comes close to that, but it doesn't fully deliver on the same level. And again, they try momentarily in a very awkward moment, I think, just because of how it's written, in Lee's apartment when they're trying to like build some chemistry between the two there. And there are just other bits and parts over the course of the film where it's kind of like the Rhedosaurus takes a momentary back seat. But by and large, yeah, the Rhedosaurus is a part of the film, but not good enough. And it's, again, I go back to that Act 2 and how that act is structured. And I realize that other than the slowness and semi-poor writing involved with Act 2, the acting of our lead characters, our two lead characters, that the next thing that really I think hurts this movie a little bit is the fact that there's little Rhedosaurus. That, yeah, they give you enough and they're not, like, they show it right away. Like, they don't really tease you at all about what this thing is. And on the one hand, I like that. But then at the same time, in a general sense, the Rhedosaurus, I don't think the footage makes up for some of the lackluster moments of the film. And the New York destruction scene, when I watched it in preparation for this podcast, I realized, I'm like, that not only was short, it actually was kind of underwhelming. Like, I thought there was maybe more destruction than there was, and there really wasn't. And the battle at night when they finally wound him and then the soldiers end up getting sick after coming in relatively close contact with his blood, it's very brief. More time is spent on those soldiers collapsing and getting ill than on the Rhedosaurus, them attacking the Rhedosaurus. And the roller coaster scene at the end, it's very interesting. I think it's a unique thing that, I mean, it's even featured on our t-shirts here. It's very unique in that you trap a monster inside of a roller coaster deal, and then you end up killing it, and then there's fire and all that. It makes for a very visual feast. But the interesting thing too, and a brief side note, is there's a bit of a plot hole in how did he get into the middle of that roller coaster without damaging part of it, because that whole roller coaster is already intact when he's in the center of it when that whole sequence begins. So there's a whoopsie moment there. But I really wish this movie would have done a little bit more of that. But then like you've said a couple times, this movie's budget was $200,000, which even for a movie like this is actually not that much. And to
Yeah.
put it into perspective, King Kong, 20 years earlier, guess the budget of that one.
It was I think I could have sworn I've seen it, but I would say it would be much more than this. Probably around the ballpark of $500,000.
You are absolutely correct. And that not only was it
Do I get a prize?
not only was it $500,000, it was $500,000 in the early days of the Depression. Okay, $500,000 in 1933, and you were to adjust that for inflation today, that's still a decent budget, and that was a lot for a movie that, you know, was being filmed several years after the Great Depression began. That's a lot, and it shows. All of that money is on the screen in the original King Kong. Here, it's a little less than half of that Kong budget.
I would almost say half of the budget for the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms had to go towards the stop motion
potentially
for kind of the little amount that's being used.
Yeah, and I think in many respects, if this movie were even given like an extra $100,000, I think the movie could have been improved. First and foremost, I would trade out our lead actors for some more charismatic ones. But then, yeah, I would spend some of the extra dough on, you know, either extending or adding more scenes of the Rhedosaurus. And I think the biggest thing that kind of held this movie back from being, I think, even more spectacular is its budget. You know, because like I said, 20 years earlier, Kong had not only a budget that was $300,000 more, but even when you adjust it for inflation, like $200,000 a Beast of 20,000 Fathoms, if you were to throw that into 1933, that would have gone a hell of a lot further in 1933 than in 53. So in many respects, this was operating on close to a shoestring budget. I mean, you know, and for a film that's supposed to be a special effects movie, you know, you would prefer to have a slightly larger budget or even a majority of that small budget you have go towards the effects. But, you know, anyone who is familiar with monster movies of the 50s and 60s, you understand that more times than not, that's not the case. So it's disappointing because I love the Rhedosaurus. I love Harryhausen's work here. But the lack of Rhedosaurus action and just the other things I had mentioned over the course of this discussion, it does hurt the film a little bit. It makes the film a little lackluster, I hate to say.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got nothing else as far as the visual effects portion. I've kind of said my piece on it.
I want to say, though, that there are a couple things I found funny over the course of watching this film. One is that back at the apartment of Lee, when Tom's going through those pictures of dinosaurs, you can kind of see through some of the pictures he's looking at. And the moment when they show the Rhedosaurus picture, when you rewind, just before they showed the picture, it was not the picture of the Rhedosaurus he was looking at. It was a picture of an old Tyrannosaurus painting that he was looking at. So there were some whoopsies there. And
I do notice that when they were at Lee's apartment where he was talking to someone, I forget, I think it's the colonel. Maybe the colonel or...
No, he's talking to the
fishermen.
Operator who's trying to get in touch with that captain of a vessel that got attacked.
Yeah, and he definitely knows that there was a cutout. Kind of stopped right there because you saw a little bit of a jump right there.
Yep. And then the other funny moment, I have to say this. This is another thing that I don't want to say it hurts the movie as a whole, but it really doesn't make this movie look good, I guess. It's the moment in which Dr. Elson is killed by the Rhedosaurus. He's in this sort of a bathoscope type of deal with another member of the Navy. And so the Rhedosaurus shows up, and of course he's all excited, and he's so excited that the moment when the Rhedosaurus comes up and gobbles that bathoscope, that I find, first and foremost, I find his death to be underwhelming. That the movie handled it poorly, because here is a very lovable old man character who also is portrayed by a pretty good actor, and it's just a footnote when he dies. It's just a brief footnote. There's no real impact to it.
I would like to
However,
know
I will say I like the fact that it killed his character because it upped the stakes a little bit, saying no one is safe, even though it's the 50s. We know Tom isn't going to die and all that. But the other thing that I thought was just sort of unrealistic was the moment the Rhedosaurus is about to gobble that bathoscope, Dr. Elson is still excitedly talking about it, describing it, instead of like, oh no, like, you know, getting ready to like, no, don't, you know, have a moment of realizing he's going to die. Instead, he's like, and the most interesting thing about it is... that just is bullshit. That was a poorly written moment right there. Like, I can understand a scientist who maybe discovers something within their own field being very excited about it, but if that particular thing that they just found is about to kill them, I find it very hard to believe they'd be like, look at how pretty.
Also,
you know?
I would like to know if the Rhedosaurus actually swallowed that whole little submarine capsule thing whole, because
it did. I'm sure it did.
Because that was pretty decent size in a way.
Well, and there was that weird shot. Here's another thing too. There was this overly long shot of a shark and octopus fighting, and you could tell it was in a tank.
Yeah.
Okay.
There were certain instances where you saw a little bit of the tank itself and all that.
Yeah, and they try to make it seem like it was happening like in the middle of the ocean, because their bathoscope it didn't reach the floor. It was kind of hovering in the middle of the water, but you see the floor, and they're looking straight out the window at it. I'm like, there's no floor there.
And then,
but they're making it seem like they're on the floor.
And then you also see the octopus is kind of, you see the underbelly of it, like on the side of whatever the tank that they're shooting this whole kind of ocean scene from. And yeah, it's pretty obvious.
It's poorly done. It's unnecessary. It's overly long. But then, too, they try to make it seem like the Rhedosaurus comes up on the shark and the octopus and swallows him. That was a special effects shot that I thought didn't look good, because it was terrible. It was terrible how it was filmed. I don't know how else it could have done it, but it wasn't good.
Yeah, it felt a little bit out of place.
Yeah, I would have cut that whole shark octopus thing out entirely. That was not needed.
Yeah.
You didn't need that.
Nope.
Anything else you want to discuss? Otherwise, we can go into final thoughts and a rating.
I would maybe just point out, as far as the score of the film. I'm not sure who specifically did the score here. Music by David Buttolph.
Yep.
I would at least say, for the film itself, I would say for the score, it's relatively good, and I think it fits this specific movie pretty darn well. And I think a lot of the music in here was utilized pretty well and kind of did what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good too. It's the kind of music that I associate with an awful lot of science fiction / monster films of the period, and I mean that as a compliment, because it provides gravitas to what's happening on screen. I don't necessarily want a score that is very I just forgot the term I wanted to use, but somber and just kind of
The thriller.
underplayed a little bit. I want something that is sort of bombastic to capture the carnage supposedly that is going on screen, and just kind of the enormity of the stakes that are happening as well.
Yeah, a lot of the scores were put in pretty well to kind of give the film a little bit more of an atmosphere of certain aspects of it, kind of showing or telling maybe. I've lost my train of thought here, but definitely like when the beast is coming, or the Rhedosaurus is going to be coming or arriving soon, that there's specific music in there that's kind of preparing you in a way to kind of get you ready. And yeah, it's kind of your typical sort of 50s type of music for sci-fi, and I think a lot of it kind of gets the vibes, not the soundtracks themselves, kind of reverberate on other sci-fi films later on in that regard. And yeah, it does pretty well and does a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm. All right, so do we want to get into final thoughts and our rating?
The one thing before we do, you mentioned about the director here goes on to do the giant behemoth. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting that you say that, because in the scenes where you're at Elson's kind of sort of office there, where it's pretty enormous, and you had this entire,
it's very spacious
skeleton. You had this big brontosaurus like skeleton, where he says that it's kind of an ancestor to Rhedosaurus. I wonder if the director sort of got that idea to use that sort of this brontosaurus ancestor to Rhedosaurus to be more or less of what the giant behemoth was later on when he directed that film.
I'm not sure. I don't remember a whole lot about the backstory of Giant Behemoth, but I do remember this. Willis O'Brien, who had done the effects of Kong, did the effects of Giant Behemoth, and that Giant Behemoth was produced by a UK studio rather than a West. And I think there's an interesting backstory to that. I have the Giant Behemoth. I'm not sure if there's a documentary on that DVD or not. It's been a few years since I've seen that movie as well. But what I do remember of the Giant Behemoth is that it is a surprisingly good movie. In fact, I might even like it a little bit more than this. But again, it's been a few years. I would have to, watch it here, like within the next day or two, and find out. Maybe I will tomorrow. Who knows? I'm actually kind of curious about it. Maybe I'll do that this afternoon. But
maybe, because you've got more than 24 hours.
Well, yeah,
to look at it. So
yeah, I know. But
yeah, let's just
we'll have to definitely. We'll have to definitely cover that soon enough as well, because there's an interesting backstory to how that got going and why it is the way that it is. But I think, too, there are similarities, certain shots in Giant Behemoth that are similar to what you see in Beast from 20,000 Fathoms as well. But I would advise you to pick that one up, too, because that's a fun film. It's interesting in and of itself.
I know it's been a handful of years since I've last saw anything towards Giant Behemoth.
Yeah, we got to cover that now. I'm actually anxious to watch that now.
I'm sure you are.
But I'm just going to dive into my final thoughts here, and I'm going to do letter grades instead of the buy, rent, or pass thing. I'm abandoning that. But,
that's fine with me.
The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms is definitely a movie that I think deserves respect for those of us who are giant monster fans. And I think even more so for kaiju fans, because this definitely, like I said, is one of the parental films to Godzilla. In fact, it may even be more of sort of the main influence for Godzilla, even more so than King Kong. And so the film as a whole, I hate to say this, I'll say it this way. I respect the movie for the fact that it introduced atomic weaponry and atomic radiation as a plot point for a monster film, because that is the basis for many of these types of films throughout the 50s and the 60s, technically all the way up to today, you know, with Japan and some of the kaiju movies that they did, obviously more specifically Godzilla, but then other films, but mainly in the 50s and 60s here in the States, it was kind of when that whole plot point was very more mainstream. And so it deserves my respect, and I give it my respect. With that being said, though, I was unfortunately a little underwhelmed by this film. As I've stated over the course of this discussion, that I think the two main actors are not that charismatic, not that interesting. Definitely part of that is the writing. A decent chunk of that is the writing. Another part of that is the actors themselves. Good to great actors will always add a little pizzazz or a little extra to their performances than what the script gives them. So it's especially during that second act when the film really ends up lagging, and part of it again is not the actors' fault. The actors, when they are on screen, just aren't enough to carry it. So that's very unfortunate. Some of the writing choices made over the course of this film too, I think, hurt it. Again, that second act again, and how elongated it is and how they structured it. The fact that they try to build a romance, but they almost seem to abandon that as quickly as they try to start it. You got to figure out what you're doing. Do I want them to build a romance there? No, not really, because like I said earlier, I see it in virtually every movie of this type during this period, and they all play the same way, and it's just, I'm kind of tired of it because I've seen it enough times. But if you're going to commit to it, then you need to commit to it. I would rather have the usual schmaltzy crap than for you to like sort of like open up the door and put one foot in, but then to just be like, oh shit, and then quickly close it and say, no, we're not going to do that. The lack of Rhedosaurus action and kind of some of the destruction moments, especially during the New York sequence, sadly underdelivers. And I don't blame Harryhausen for that. I blame the budget. I think with a $200,000 budget for a special effects film, yeah, it's not gonna fully deliver on what you want out of the effects area, which is sad, because I think if you're making a special effects film, a bulk, if not a majority of your budget, even if it's by 1 penny, should go to the effects budget and nothing else. And that's just unfortunate, because the Rhedosaurus is a spectacular looking creature. Harryhausen does an awesome job of animating the creature and anything else it interacts with as well. The only special effects moment that I think is bad, and I just talked about this a few minutes ago, is that moment where they try to make it look like the Rhedosaurus eats the shark and the octopus. With all that being said, the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms deserves our respect. We should give it to it. It is mildly entertaining. Once the beast hits New York, it does pick up a little bit, becomes a little bit more entertaining. However, it still is a bit lackluster with its action. Even the final sequence of them trying to shoot the Rhedosaurus and then try to get off the roller coaster, it's a little slower paced and less dramatic than it really should be. It's a decent film. It's not spectacular. And I hate to say that, because like I said, this is, you know, a good Harryhausen project that displays his ability to animate creatures. And it's just sad that everything else surrounding it, minus Kenneth Tobey and Cecil Kellaway, is lackluster, to say the least. So my final grade for this, I'm going to give it a C+. I think it is a little bit of above average, and I think the reason why I am doing that is more because of Harryhausen's work here. Harryhausen's work, if it wasn't as good as it was, this could be anywhere from as high as a C to probably as low as like a D, if it wasn't for his work on here. Mm-hmm. And The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, hey, if you love it and you think it's one of the best giant monster movies that the Hollywood has made, hey, great. Awesome. I'm happy for you. But what I saw in preparation for this really disappointed me in a lot of ways. And that made me sad, honestly, because this was one of the driving forces that inspired Godzilla, if not more of a driving force than Kong itself. And that just was disappointing. And so I'm giving it a C+. It's ever so slightly above average giant monster film.
Yeah, with this being its 70th anniversary and having seen it the first time in odd number of years, it's a little bit different than from what I remember, and probably a bit different from what Kent remembers here. And the one thing that I've realized overall when watching this movie is that it felt shorter than what I was expecting to be, at least. And it felt like there wasn't a whole lot of Rhedosaurus here. Granted, there being really good stop motion effects here, say, when it comes to Ray Harryhausen. He does a phenomenal job. But other than that, with the sparsely bare bones production budget that it had, and then being distributed by Warner Brothers, you would think, when it comes to Warner Brothers, that you'd think that maybe you should have gotten a little bit more of a budget in that regard, but didn't get quite the budget that they want, and hence that probably affected the script, where it could have been more beefy in that regards, and maybe have a little bit more in-depth characters in here. Yeah, just sort of, I would say overall, with the production budget, probably just made things a little bit lackluster and a bit disappointing in a way, and kind of made the story more straightforward on the surface, pretty much for the majority of throughout the entire film. But I would also like to give props to this film, at least, that if it really wasn't for Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, we may not have gotten a Godzilla franchise or kaiju genre for that regard, and we may not even have a podcast dedicated to everything kaiju in that regard. Maybe possibly tokusatsu in that way. We may not have had Ultraman or some other Super Sentai or what have you. History would have been a little bit more different. But in that sort of sense, yeah, you do get some moments here and there, and some of the human elements was pretty good, but with the two lead actors and actresses in this film were only delved mainly into the television industry instead of the feature-length film industry. You're not going to get a whole lot of sort of experience in that regard, I can't think of anything right now, but yeah, so the budget kind of hampered things a little bit of the movie, making things a little bit shorter than usual with the script, obviously, and then probably maybe sort of hampered a little bit on the stop motion effects, maybe it could have been a little bit more if you added on more to the production budget. Yeah, it's a little bit lackluster overall, but I would give The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms at least a borderline B minus. It's still pretty good for its time, with some modest character, I would say, supporting characters, phenomenal stop motion effects. Here, kind of, a straightforward story, but things just didn't quite didn't get quite executed well enough. But I'm still sort of giving it props and tipping my hat to at least inspiring other films after its release. So I'm still going to give it a borderline B minus.
All right. And with that, we are entering -1 territory. But before we enter that territory, we will be back Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for our commentary on Shin Ultraman. So I think that'll be fun and interesting. Jason has yet to see it, so I think it'll be a treat to kind of see Jason's on-the-spot reaction as we go through that film. That should be fun. And then we will be back Sunday for Godzilla -1, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on that day. And then we enter our hiatus until December 30th at the moment. So
our year-end Kaiju Palooza.
Yeah, for a 10-hour show this year.
Oh, so, God,
no. We hope to had fun listening or watching us. And thank you so much for doing that, for your support and views. And so with that, we'll see you in a couple days when we do our Shin Ultraman commentary.
And before we sign off, as usual, if you see the subscribe button down below or above wherever you're watching us, make sure to hit that subscribe button, as well as smash or stomp the like button. And if you have any comments regarding to the film that we just reviewed, make sure to have them down below. And you can find everything Daikaiju Network all in one place at our Linktree URL right there /Daikaiju Network. And we're available on the following video platforms such as YouTube, Rumble, Twitch, Facebook, and X/Twitter, and also available on the following audio platforms such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Podbean. And you can find both video and audio versions of our episodes right on our website at daikaijunetwork.com. So,
all right. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you here in a couple days. We'll give you a breather tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll see you guys in the next 48 hours. So take care, everyone.